evening, everyone. If everyone could have their seats, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'll do a proper welcome shortly, but just for protocol's sake, I'd like to welcome Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, pleased to come on and say a few words to start with. High Commissioner Nomotembe Tambo, who we affectionately know as Tembe. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're here to celebrate the life of a truly remarkable man, and I don't say that lightly. One of the most remarkable things about dear Bob Hughes was his complete humility and modesty, his tremendous kindness and patience. He was certainly very kind and patient to me in the time that I've been in England before he passed away. So I can only tell you that from my side, from the side of the High Commission, to the family, it's an absolute honour to be able to speak. He touched the hearts of so many, particularly in Southern Africa, obviously in the United Kingdom. But the tributes that have been flowing in from the time of his death speak to the great esteem with which he was held and the truly genuine love that people had for him. I'm here now to read a message from my President Cyril Ramaphosa, and it's dated today, the 26th of April. It begins, "To the family, comrades, and friends of Robert Hughes, Baron Hughes of Woodside. I am sorry that I cannot be with you today to celebrate the life and contribution to life of Baron Hughes, or Comrade Bob, as we will remember him. When the world considers the historic struggle for the liberation of our country and the heroes and heroines at its forefront, the names of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Helen Joseph, Father Trevor Huddleston, as well as other prominent South Africans, quite naturally come to mind. In South Africa, however, we never forget the essential role played by the millions of people around the globe who were mobilized by leaders with courage, passion, and principle to create the largest international campaign for democracy and human rights the world has ever seen. Bob was such a leader, and one of its most prominent. The time he spent in South Africa no doubt played a formative role in his activism, but only his abiding desire for justice and equality can properly account for the depth of his commitment to the fight against apartheid and his dedication to the cause of freedom. The achievement of democracy in South Africa owes much to the endeavours of Bob Hughes and many others. Much progress has been made in giving effect to the promise of our democratic constitution and improving the lives of the South African people. We still have many challenges, and we acknowledge that we have made mistakes. We are therefore hard at work to restore the integrity, credibility, capability of our democratic institutions after the era of state capture, and to rebuild our economy after the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. To be reminded of the immense contribution to our freedom by Bob Hughes and the many citizens of the world gives us encouragement and hope. A luta continua, Vittoria è certa. Hamagatle, Comrade Bob.
How wonderful. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Can I welcome everyone here today? I'm Chitra Karve. I'm Chair of Action for Southern Africa, AXA. I now see many, many friends here that have been with me on a very long journey since we were all in the anti-apartheid movement together. Welcome and thank you all for coming. Bob Hughes was a significant person in so many lives, and he's given decades-long commitment to South and Southern Africa. It is so appropriate we hold this event here in South Africa House. I thank the High Commissioner for her unstinting support for us and for allowing us to have this event in this beautiful space today. Before I invite our first speakers, there are just a few apologies that I would like to mention here. Obviously there are more. They would all have been here if they could. They're Gordon Brown, Peter Hain, Glenys and Neil Clinic. All were involved with the AAM and have continued their solidarity work for the region. We have a pretty packed schedule, so I won't take up any more of your time, and to ask everyone please to warmly welcome Jenny Hughes Swanson, who will speak for Bob's family. Thank you, Jenny.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the High Commissioner and the staff of South Africa House for making this venue available, and our friends in AXA and the Anti-Apartheid Archive Committee for organising the event. Thank you also to everyone who's attending, wherever you are located. I'm privileged to be speaking to you on behalf of the Hughes family, and particularly Bob's 5 children. We know that Bob Hughes reached a high level in political life. I want to speak now about his earlier years, when he was just an eager young activist with a wholehearted determination to improve life for others. Our father was a wonderful man and an amazing parent, but he saw himself as an ordinary man, and he identified with ordinary people. His wartime childhood, with his father absent at sea and his stepmother suffering poor health, was sometimes challenging. And this, combined with his teenage experiences in South Africa, gave him real insight into many common problems. 5 years as an engineering apprentice, working from age 16 to maintain and repair the machinery in a rubber factory in Natal, made him an ardent trade unionist with a great respect for the black workers there. Dad totally believed in the power of ordinary people to move mountains if they worked together and supported each other. Mutual solidarity was a very important concept to him. In the years following his return to Scotland in 1954, Dad attended Labour Party summer schools, Fabian group discussion weekends, and training sessions run for prospective election candidates by his union. He read widely on political and economic topics, learned to discuss and to debate, and gained experience in campaigning by starting at the bottom and working up. He knew that to be a good and effective politician took knowledge, skill, and integrity. Few who knew him in those years would have predicted his future. He was then just one young activist among many, although even then with a striking determination to work hard and to make a difference. Our 1960s household contained 4 politically committed adults, and local, national, and international events were constantly discussed. But our parents also believed in practical action. During a shortage of accommodation for African students, we children found ourselves relocated to bunk beds in the attic, while a succession of African students moved into the main bedrooms. They cheerfully queued with us for the only bathroom, shared their traditional dishes, and joined the political discussions around the kitchen table. Dad sincerely believed in the power of the economic boycott. It was typical of his integrity that because he was encouraging others to join it, his own household supported it absolutely. For over 3 decades, no South African produce was ever bought or eaten, while any gifts of South African origin were hastily taken to a local hospital. As many here will know, to be an activist is often to attract hostility. As Dad became more involved in the anti-apartheid movement, death threats arrived almost weekly, and this continued for more than 3 decades. In 1963, as the economic boycott took effect, threats were extended to the whole family. Several sturdy young men joined the household for several weeks, working in pairs to escort my father to work and to protect the family at home. Dad was for many years a banned person in South Africa. Our telephone was tapped, and we knew that the South African security services regularly tracked his movements. During this period, it was thought too dangerous for his siblings in South Africa to remain in regular contact with us, and this loss of connection was deeply felt by us all. Our father saw himself as an ordinary man, but he was gifted with great intelligence, remarkable perception, and impressive energy. These helped him to have the career he did, working for others and making a difference even into his 80s. Although he worked long hours, Dad was very family-orientated. At weekends, he would take us out while our mother rested. This was very rare for a father in the 1960s and 1970s. As younger children in Aberdeen, we went to the beaches or hills, where he taught us to climb rocks, wade streams, and cook sausages over an open campfire. If we went into the sea, so did he, although he hated cold water. When we wanted to learn to roller skate and to ice skate, Dad strapped on skates and learned alongside us. He was a keen sportsman, and in his 40s could take on 2 sporty teenagers at tennis and win. When he was able to find time from his heavy workload, he relished golf and also fly fishing. Outside school and work hours, where Bob Hughes went, his children often went too. He took us to the fish market and to the harbour to see the cargo ships. If he was delivering political leaflets, we helped. If he was attending a march, he would call, "Who wants to come?" And there would be a thunder of feet as we rushed to join him. Bob was dearly loved by his large and extended family, and we were lucky enough to know that he loved us too, from his wife and siblings to the youngest great-grandchildren and great-nieces and nephews. Despite his busy life and many commitments, his heart was big enough to embrace us all. Bob Hughes, Dad, you are much missed by all, and the world is a poorer place without you.
Next, we're delighted to have a message from the former Honorary Secretary of the Anti-Apartheid Movement, we all know very well, Abdul Minty. Before it starts, just a few words from me. Abdul was key to the discussions about the significance of continuing the solidarity work of the anti-apartheid movement into a new era post the free and fair elections in 1994. The view from the region was that many challenges still exist. And so not only was AXA established, but a network of local authorities was also established alongside. The connections developed through the campaigning of the anti-apartheid movement were deepened as it became possible to build new systems of non-racial local government in South Africa. And through these links, an exchange of insights and experience between local councillors and government workers began. Just yesterday, a delegation of mayors and municipal officials from South Africa asked if AXA could connect them to boroughs and local councils and trade union officials in the UK, as they were fairly new in their roles and wanted to hear how it works here, or in fact doesn't. We will respond to their request. It is in these partnerships where knowledge is shared freely and where all participants gain insight and strategies on what works and what does not. AXA will be happy to nurture such partnerships alongside with our campaigning work. The platforms for these partnerships was built during the anti-apartheid movement days, led by people like Bob and Abdul. Let us hear from Abdul now.
Tribute to Bob Hughes and Margaret Hughes at the memorial meeting in Britain. In March 1960, the newly formed anti-apartheid movement launched a one-month intensive boycott of South African goods throughout Britain. Ordinary British people were asked by Barbara Castle, Trevor Huddleston and others to respond positively to the call of the South African Liberation Movement not to buy South African fruit and other products. As Julius Nyerere said at the time, ordinary people would thereby withdraw their support from the apartheid system. Thus, on 1st May 1960, as May Day was celebrated across the country and internationally, there were several boycott campaigns that had continued throughout Britain. At that time, I was sent by the anti-apartheid movement to Aberdeen to speak at their May Day rally, and there I met my hosts, Bob and Margaret Hughes, with whom I stayed overnight. In their kitchen, there were several homemade banners in support of the consumer boycott, as was the case in many other homes throughout the country. Thus, in this way, ordinary people had mobilized themselves to act in solidarity with the people of South Africa and to launch the one-month boycott of South African goods in March 1960. In 1970, Bob was elected to the House of Commons as Member of Parliament for Aberdeen, and the family came to live in London. Bob became active in the movement for colonial freedom, in which I was already active in reporting on events in Southern Africa. We were both active on Southern African issues, and later in 1976, Bob was elected chair of the anti-apartheid movement. With Trevor Huddleston and others, he worked to grow the anti-apartheid movement into a bigger and more influential organization, drawing support from political movements, trade unions, religious bodies, students, and a wide variety of institutions, whereby it became everybody's movement. The anti-apartheid movement consisted of a diverse group of supporters from all walks of life, and Bob and others helped to mold them into what essentially became one of the most influential international solidarity movements in the world. It is important and worth recalling the basis of the AAM and what was put forward by Bob Hughes at numerous meetings. He said repeatedly that it is the oppressed people of Southern Africa and their liberation movements which would ultimately bring about their liberation. However, he firmly believed that international solidarity in support of that struggle was important and devoted himself wholeheartedly to implement various campaigns with great commitment and energy. They all produced results and mobilized thousands of people across the world. With Trevor Huddleston and many others, he believed that the apartheid system was inherently evil and totally immoral and could not be reformed, but had to be destroyed. He recognized that some imposed sanctions in the mistaken belief that international pressure would make the apartheid regime more repressive. At the same time, others claimed that those who are already oppressed would not benefit from further suffering to be brought about by sanctions. In Indeed, they were protagonists of the view that additional external investment would in fact be beneficial for the victims of apartheid, since they would benefit from an expanding South African economy, which would also increase the African middle class and result in some way in the ending of the apartheid system. Bob heard these claims many times and responded that somehow those people wrongly believed that if you feed a lion more and more meat, it would one day turn into a vegetarian. Bob understood the super-exploitative role of external capital in the apartheid system, which perpetuated cheap labor and produced super profits for the investors. One of the most important issues that Bob and I raised jointly with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when they met in South Africa after the democratic transition was the direct support provided to the South African security, military and nuclear capabilities by external investors and South African business. This created a threat to the South African people, but to the entire Southern African region and beyond. This remains a major issue to be followed up, and the international community has a responsibility to ensure that justice is done. Bob and I had the privilege and honor to be the guests of President Sam Nujoma and the new Namibian government when that country achieved its independence in 1990. This was also the first time that Bob met President Nelson Mandela, who made a great impression on him. Of course, they met several times after that, including at the famous Wembley Stadium welcome concert.
Ladies and gentlemen, is it not on? Because it's a celebration of life, so let us not be so down, and let's join. Clap your hands if you want to. You can stand up if you want to. Let's celebrate life, huh? Yeah. All right. Cheers. Shona malanga, shona, shona malanga, shona malanga, shona, shona malanga, shona, shona malanga, shona malanga, shona malanga, shona, shona malanga, shona malanga, shona. Sesizo tibana, so tibana. Gepazuge khatini sesizotibana tibana gepazuge khatini shona malanga shona shona malanga shona malanga shona malanga shona shona malanga sesizotibana so tibana Gebazuge khatini sesizotibana tibana gebazuge khatini shona malanga shona shona malanga shona malanga shona malanga shona shona malanga sesizotibana tibana gebazuge sesizotibana sotibana gebazuge khatini shona malanga shona shona malanga shona malanga shona. Thank you.
Thank you to our wonderful singers. Well, we've heard from the family. Whoops, the sound's gone. Technical itch. Please wait. Try again. We've heard now from the family a moving talk about Bob's personal life. We've heard from Abdul Minty about his time with the anti-apartheid movement, leading us so splendidly. Bob was also a committed parliamentarian, and I would like now to welcome Baroness Angela Smith, Labour leader in the House of Lords, to say a few words.
Thank you. It's a real honour to be here to talk about Bob at his celebration of his life today. And it gives him a chance to see if the microphone is right. When someone lives a long life, those that know them in their later years can often feel we've missed out on not knowing the younger man or younger woman. With Bob, that was never the case. In his later years, he still had that same commitment to the issues that inspired and motivated him as a young man. And he balanced that thoughtful, passionate approach to politics alongside a warm, humorous personality. He left the Commons as I was elected, but I knew him by reputation. I then got to know him better in the Lords when I joined a small group of colleagues at lunchtime for what's known as the Bishop's Bar. And he would often pop in as well to my office for a chat when I became leader. Sometimes it was about politics, but he'd also have a joke or funny story he'd heard that he wanted to share. As a 13-year-old, as we've heard, he emigrated with his family from Aberdeen to South Africa. And he later said, it was a cataclysmic experience of seeing how people lived that started me on the process of becoming a socialist. Returning to Aberdeen to further his engineering studies, he joined the Labour League of Youth and fought his first general election in 1959, the year I was being born, in North Angus and Mearns. Now, he modestly claimed later on that he was the candidate because he was the only one who turned up for the selection meeting. Though he came second on that occasion, he'd caught the political bug, and he went on to serve as a councillor in Aberdeen, only standing down after his election to Parliament. Reading through those press reports in the 1960s, it's clear that the new councillor, Robert Hughes, as he was then, quickly established himself as dedicated and hard-working. As the convener of both the health and welfare and the social work committees, he took on issues that went right to the heart of the quality of life. Poverty, housing, health, employment and education, all inextricably linked. He maintained a real pride in the achievements of Aberdeen Corporation, believing that local government is empowered to better the lives of its citizens. He tackled the unfairness of councillors living in council homes being barred from voting on issues on council housing matters. And he got a special dispensation from the Secretary of State, especially when it made a meeting in Quorate unable to deal with urgent issues. He was passionate about building homes and health provision, and Aberdeen became the first local authority to sponsor family planning clinics. He persuaded the corporation to boycott South African goods, and his antipathy to the SNP was only increased when they imposed him on this. Reading through the press accounts at the time, he was rarely out of the news and clearly highly respected and liked by his colleagues. He was progressive and unafraid to make the case for his beliefs, even when others doubted or opposed him. So he was a natural to succeed the Aberdeen North MP Hector Hughes when he retired. Bob's 1970 election manifesto reflected the issues that he'd worked so hard on: more housing, an accelerated school building programme, an integrated health service, and for the UK to use its influence to end the Vietnam War. In an interview that year, he said, as an MP, he would focus on employment, wider healthcare, and foreign policy. And he did. His maiden speech showed how he brought all his experience of being a councillor, a trade unionist, and anti-apartheid campaigner to his parliamentary work. He wasted no time in laying into Ted Heath's new Conservative government for its inadequate regional development policy. His assessment of the government's housing policy was absolutely devastating, exposing the scandal of the City of Aberdeen being forced to pay, over 15 years, interest of more than £17 million on a loan of just over £4 million. He dismissed the government's approach as factually irrelevant to the needs of local authorities. And he finished that maiden speech with a warning that if the government took the decision to sell arms to South Africa, or a peace treaty was to be concluded with the Smith regime in Rhodesia, it would be intolerable and cause irreparable damage to the whole future of mankind. Recognising his talents, Harold Wilson appointed him to the front bench in 1974 and then as a Scottish Office Minister. But he resigned just over a year later in protest over cuts to public services. He then served on the Scottish Affairs Committee for 3 years, chairing it for the last year. He was well known as an opponent of Scottish devolution, arguing that the case for was driven by Conservative Party policies and the pull of a free market economy in London and the South East. As he put it, I see the problems of ordinary working people in the southern half of England as I go about London. Their problems are much the same as Scotland's regarding education, housing and so on. And he argued that we must all work together towards a common future. When Neil Kinnock became leader, Bob returned to the front bench, bringing his customary diligence, passion and of course humour to all he took on. That he was both respected and popular with his colleagues was evident when he was elected to the Shadow Cabinet in 1985 and became the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport. Enjoying a good joke, Bob never shied away from those at his own expense, and I sometimes think he enjoyed those all the more. One such story he often told. It was when he decided to return to Aberdeen on the overnight sleeper to attend a pensioners' rally the following morning, planning to be back in Westminster in time for the 3-line whip evening votes. He arrived at King's Cross to find the sleeper had been delayed, so he nipped out to a small Italian restaurant round the corner, enjoyed a meal and a glass or two of wine. He then boarded the sleeper, went to bed, and he slept soundly. Woken by the sounds of the train in the station, he got up, dressed, and disembarked, only to find he was still at King's Cross. He had slept soundly, but only for about half an hour, and the train was still delayed. Then he said he just couldn't get back to sleep, but he still made the rally and the votes. Some were surprised when Bob took his seat in the Lords, but he was never somebody who would give up fighting for his beliefs and remained an active working peer. When reading through Bob's contributions in Parliament, I was amazed to find he'd spoken over 4,500 times. Fortunately, they weren't all long speeches, but often well-timed, witty interjections on ministers, much to their discomfort and colleagues' enjoyment. In those many contributions, there's one I think sums up his life's work. It was on the 1979 Queen's speech, and it's a longer and more philosophical speech than he usually made. He spoke with passion about his commitment to the United Kingdom, about industry, shipbuilding, poverty, decency. And when talking about South Africa and Zimbabwe, he asked the question, what is freedom? He then draws all those together and he concludes, the only way this country can grow and prosper is by the participation of the people and their involvement in society. I cannot see how we can grow and prosper as a nation and a people unless we establish a democratic socialist government. Whatever arguments we have for the short-term or long-term aims, the main philosophical divide will remain between us, which is how do we recognise a person's value in society? He went on, I value people as individuals, and I value their freedom and their integrity. We cannot have that without socialism. In my view, he said, freedom and socialism go together. We cannot have one without the other. Bob never pushed himself forward or claimed credit for his many achievements, but I do hope that he looked back on his long life and recognised that he made a difference. He was warm, witty and engaging. I spoke to Neil Kinnock before coming here tonight, and Neil told me and described him to me as gutsy, noble, unselfish and unassuming. We in the Labour Party are very proud of him.
Thank you. Comes of being short. Apparently, it doesn't work for the live streaming if I don't speak directly into the mic, so I hope that's worked up to now. As as Baroness was speaking, I was thinking about Bob a lot, and one of the things that I think, one of the names we've missed out today is Mike Terry. Whenever I think about Bob, I think about Mike. And the two of them together, often squabbling actually, I have to say. I remember following along just thinking, oh dear, is this going to be all right or not? But they always, when it was public, they were always in step. So they managed somehow to get to that point. They respected each other. I think they loved each other. And I do miss Mike as well as Bob. So moving on, thank you for that. Moving on, we're now going to have a reading from a friend of Bob, Brian Wilson, former MP for Cunningham North.
Well, High Commissioner, Hughes family, comrades and friends, it's a great privilege to participate in this event and to pay my own brief tribute to a man for whom I had the highest regard over all the decades I knew him. Bob was undoubtedly one of the good guys, steadfast in principle, quietly effective in every cause he engaged in, none more so than the noble cause of racial equality. I was asked to do a reading of a Burns poem. It reminded me on a previous visit to this building, I'd been asked to deliver the Immortal Memory, which is the main speech at a Burns supper commemorating the work of Robert Burns. And that was, it turned out that was the first post-apartheid Burns supper held in this building. And I shuddered to think of some of the ones that might have preceded it. And plenty kilts would have been around, I fear. That evening, the High Commissioner, Lindewi Mabuza, gave a stunning rendition of a poem by Robert Burns, not the one I'm going to read, but The Slave's Lament, which describes the anguish of people forced from their homes in sweet Senegal for transportation to Virginia. And for an 18th century peasant poet who'd never left Scotland to identify so completely with these emotions was remarkable. And the High Commissioner's delivery that evening was unforgettable. So giving Burns a place in these evening events seems all the more appropriate to me anyway. The poem I'm going to read is a great anthem of egalitarianism, a quality with which Bob was very richly endowed. There's a line in it with a rather unflattering reference to lords, but the lords Burns was thinking about were landlords who held so much power over people's lives and still do. And Bob was very sound on that issue too. The rather nonsensical fact, and I'm sure Angela would agree, that in order to serve in the upper chamber of a democratic parliament, one's burdened with a title is not the fault of those who bear it. And there was certainly nothing lordly about Bob Hughes. His services to Africa were exemplary and of historic significance. His services to constituents outstanding for their diligence, and his services to the labour movement principled and consistent. And it's in that spirit we celebrate his memory this evening. Is there for honest poverty that hangs his head and all that? The coward slave, we pass him by. We dare be poor for all that. For all that and all that, our toil's obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gowd for all that. What though in hamely fare we dine, wear hodden grey and all that, ye fools their silks and knaves their wine, a man's a man for all that. For all that and all that, their tinsel show and all that, the honest man, though e'er sae poor, is king o' men for all that. Ye see yon birkie cod a lord, with struts and stairs and all that, though hundreds worship at his word, he's but a coof for all that. For all that and all that, his ribbon star and all that, the man of independent mind, he looks and laughs at all that. A prince can make a belt at night, a marquis duke and all that, but a honest man's aboon his might, good faith he mauna for that. For all that and all that, their dignities and all that, the pith of sense and pride of worth, are higher rank than all that. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that. that man to man, the world o'er, shall brothers be for all that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased now to welcome someone else that we all will remember and love well, the anti-apartheid movement. Another one of our leaders, again, exemplary political career, exemplary role in the anti-apartheid movement, Richard Cabourn.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and it's great to be here excelling the virtues of Bob Hughes. Bob Hughes, Lord Hughes. Bob Hughes, the friend, the colleague, the comrade. Friend, colleague and comrade to many in this room and many outside as well. A lot of them who looked up to Bob for leadership. I remember when somebody said to me, Bob Hughes is a politician who uses the oxygen of publicity, but Bob Hughes is a politician that uses the oxygen of integrity. And I think that really summed up Bob Hughes. Bob would always listen. He would always have a debate. But the one thing about Bob, at the end of it, he always delivered what he said. And that was the integrity of the man. And these were the qualities of the man that led the anti-apartheid movement for nearly 20 years, successfully led the anti-apartheid for nearly 20 years. He was the man that could bring people together around that common cause, people who had got diverse opinions, but Bob had that ability, that integrity. And I had the privilege of working with Bob for nearly 40 years. We had a lot in common, Bob and I. We're lifelong members of the Labour Party. We both served an apprenticeship. We both left school at 15. And we were members, proudly, of the AEU. And it was the anti-apartheid movement that was the third part of that brought Bob and I together. I joined the anti-apartheid movement through the trade union, through the AEU, because it was very politically active, and with my comrade Paul Blomfield we set up the Sheffield anti-apartheid movement, and that was a fairly strong bunch. And Chitra was, I think, earlier saying about the local authorities against apartheid, and we played a significant role in that. But then I went to the European Parliament in 1979, in the first directly elected European Parliament. And it's then when I really started working with Bob. I've been a member of the AM before, as I said, with Paul Blomfield and many others. But it was then when I met Mike Terry as well. And Chitra's talked about Mike Terry, and I can tell you, by God, they had the arguments, Bob and Mike, but they come together. And I worked with Mike and Bob in the House of Commons. There wasn't a week went past that we didn't actually have a meeting, a discussion. And we were then trying to develop the House of Commons. As I say, I was in the European Parliament at that time. But many of those discussions that we had were lively, but they were all about organising how we could use the various institutions to prosecute the case against the apartheid regime in South Africa, how we could build up the mass movements on the boycotts and the other actions that were taken. The only thing we could never get old Bob to do was to run the marathon with us, because Mike and I ran the London Marathon. We said to Bob, stop smoking, Bob, and let's start actually get training you to run the marathon. Well, we couldn't persuade him on that one, but nevertheless, Bob, as we said, Jenny said very clearly that he was very active on the sporting front. And it was those links that Bob saw between the European Parliament, the first directly elected one in 1979, and back in the House of Commons. And Bob suggested that we take Oliver Tambo over to talk to the European Parliament. Then Jan Royal was the secretary of the Socialist Group, or the Socialist Group. And I got just to tell you that if you judge people by friends, the two big friends of Bob Hughes that I sat between in the European Parliament when I went as a youngish person in 1971. One side was Barbara Castle and the other one was Janie Buchan. So you can imagine, sat between Barbara Castle and Janie Buchan in the European Parliament, what it was like, because they were both extremely good friends of Bob, but also all very active members of the anti-apartheid movement. And with the skills of Jan Royal, who was over there with us, we got Oliver Tambo over to Strasbourg, who was absolutely brilliant. He gave the message that obviously Bob would have expected to give, and that was to call for solidarity for the ANC, for the isolation of South Africa, and to create that mass movement. And that was, I think, very successful with Barbara Castle and with Janie Buchan over there, that we were able to start building those links, laying that foundations for that institution to start actually making a significant contribution to that, to the movement. I came into the Commons in '83 and still kept obviously working with Bob, but we decided, and I came in '83, which was not a good year for Labour. Thatcher was at a height. She's a great supporter of the South African government, and actually she's the one who called Nelson Mandela the terrorist, which I'll come to in a little while. So Bob decided, with Mike and myself and others, Frank Dobson, Joan Lester and many others, to start building within Parliament a platform, and to use that to make sure that we actually prosecuted as far as we could and indeed counter what was coming from what was an extremely right-wing government at that time. I think the early day motions, the PQs, the PMQs, the debates, and Abdul's been in there, the petitions that we took, representation to ministers, we used that relentlessly. And Mike Terry was there with Bob. Mike was a brilliant organiser, and Bob was a great tactician, and it was a great team, and I was able to help that as we went along. And we were in that Thatcher era, and I always remember just one incident, because many of the institutions of the Commons were very much dominated by that regime at the time. And it was a South African all-party group which was run then by what we used to call him, the Honourable Member for Pretoria, John Carlisle, if people remember. And John Carlisle was the chair of the all-party group. So Bob decided that we were going to take it off him. So we started organising. And we organised. And this is when the skill of Bob came in. This is when his integrity came in. Because he talked to people right across that spectrum of the House. He talked to people like Ivor Stanbrook, Peter Temple-Morris, Linda Chalker, David Steele, and many more. And obviously on our side, we've got Joe Lester and Frank Dobson and many, many of the others. So it was a formidable force that went in. And we actually won the day. We actually removed all their officers and we took it over, as it were, the progressive forces within the House of Commons took that over, which I think was quite significant. It was great when we were walking out and Joan Lester turns around to Bob, she says, "I'm glad it's their blood that's on the carpet and not ours." So I thought, well, that weren't bad, because it was quite an active moment of time, but it was one, again, which I think was symbolic of the leadership of the anti-apartheid movement, the skill of Bob Hughes to be able to bring that coalition of forces around that single issue. And when many people have said that this was one of the most successful single issues on the political spectrum of that time, that is absolutely true. But it was people like Bob Hughes that were able to run that as well. I remember also, again, the concert's been mentioned, the 1988 very famous conference there. And Suresh was here this evening. I think he was a treasurer at the time, and Tony Hollingsworth and the rest of them. That was incredibly successful. John Carlisle had tried to bring a writ against the BBC at that time to stop that concert going ahead. And he did that on the basis that we were supporting a terrorist organisation. Well, Paul Fox was the MD. Paul Fox was the MD of the BBC at that time, and he gave it short shrift, and that carried on. But it was the battle against those people in the House of Commons that we continued to force back with that. But it wasn't the John Carlisles of this world that were likely to stop the concert in 1988. We did a press conference in the House of Commons. Bob, I think Masakela was there, and we were doing a press conference promoting the 88 concert. And Mike Terry leans across, he said, we've got a problem, to Bob and myself. What's that? We've run out of money, and if we don't pay it by this evening, then Wembley's going to pull the plug on us, which was a bit difficult, and we're all smiling at the press, you know, just saying, giving how great this concert's going to be and fantastic, you know. And Mike Terry, in his usual very calm way, but just said, so Bob, says, come on, let's go see Kinnock. So off we go, whoops we get, and after that, we shoots off, sees Neil in his office, and he was in the opposition, leader's opposition office in the House of Commons. And we had a discussion with Neil, and unusual again, great support to the anti-apartheid movement, said, I'll try and sort it. Ron Todd, T&G. Aberdeen was in, actually, on the biannual conference of the T&G. Cut a long story short, he biked to check over, we paid Wembley, and the concert was hugely successful, as you all know. But that's the solidarity, and that's the way that Bob Hughes operated. He could move it into all sorts of circles and rescue things like that. I think one of the things that, I think what's come across this evening is Bob got fantastic humour. He was a man who always saw the best side of people. And he always was there to encourage people. People said to me this evening how much they loved Bob, how much he was. The only time I really, really saw Bob very, very angry was when Mandela came over, was released and came over in 1990 to visit London. And we decided that we wanted Nelson to come and address the MPs. And so we did it, we booked, because there's no room in Parliament, in the Palace of Westminster, that hasn't had an anti-apartheid movement meeting. I can tell you, we actually exploited the rent-free facilities of the House of Commons, and we milked it like mad for the anti-apartheid. I don't think we ever paid a bill in the House of Commons. But on this occasion, we wanted Nelson to come in and speak to the MPs. And we made the application to get the Grand Committee room in Westminster Hall. And we were told or advised or given a bit of advice, do you think it was right to invite somebody who is the leader of a terrorist organisation? Now that's 1990. 1990. Hughes was not pleased, I can assure you. He was bloody livid. Anyway, again, cut a long story short, we gave him a short shrift, and that took place with all the restrictions. We couldn't have television cameras, we couldn't have photographers in, and that was in 1990 of the mother of democracy. And they couldn't bring Mandela, or they tried to stop Mandela coming into that. And Bob was absolutely fuming about that, but as I say, that did take place. And Bob continued to do that work, and when he went to the Lords, and I can tell you that that was positively encouraged by the African National Congress, that we wanted to make sure we had got a voice in the House of Lords on behalf of anti-apartheid to start with, against that, but then pro. Well, and Bob continued to work through that, and obviously when ICSA was formed, he became the chair of that. But I think what's little unknown about Bob, because we did all that protest movement, we built that platform, we opposed the regime, and I think, as people have said, that we were reasonably effective in the wider movement as well, whether it was the trade unions, the churches, and the like. But what Bob did also was when we won the election, that's the Labour Party won the election in 1997, that changed it, and Bob continued to put the pressure on the government to actually consider South Africa. And it was Gordon Brown and Claire Short that went in and rescheduled the debts of Southern Africa, again with the solid support of Bob Hughes, that he was arguing that case. And I know when I, sometime later, went down to see Nelson Mandela, and that was when I asked him, and indeed he gave, which was absolutely fantastic support, to win the Olympics in 2005, and Nelson Mandela gave his personal support to that bid to win those Olympics. He said to me that he did not believe there was any single government could have done as much for Southern Africa in the rescheduling of that debt as the British government had done in the financial institution, the global financial institutions of the world. And that they done with Brown and with Claire Short and with other ministers to put that pressure on. Bob also led the discussion of the delegation to see Tony Blair when the trade agreements were being in the European Union were put together, and again to make sure that there was access for South Africa to grow its economy, that Bob Hughes was there as well. And this is little documented about this area, but that was extremely important to make sure you got a voice of integrity in a Labour administration putting that case for South Africa, which helped to start restructuring some of their economy and some of that social infrastructure there as well. And that was the mark of the man. The mark of the man, I think, was also to take that politically, but you could also convert that into real action and making sure that those people he believed in, the quality of life for them could be improved by those who got power outside South Africa, but we could influence and exercise, and Bob Hughes did that. As I say, I missed Mike Terry and I missed Bob Hughes dearly. They were truly my best friends. They were. It is the best part of my political life, working with people of such integrity. They were a great team. And now, obviously, we've lost them. But I think what they've left is a significant contribution, not only to mankind itself, but the way that we've been able to, or they have been able to, make sure that they rid it of South Africa. And so today's tribute, a man of great determination, a man of great integrity, and a man that fought for freedom for humanity. Bob Hughes, thank you very much, and rest in peace.
You did well, ladies and gentlemen. On the other song, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to do anything this time. Just relax and enjoy. Kondo wesizwe amba kahle mkhonto mkhonto wesizwe thina ma-Afrika sizimisele ukwakha isizwe sama-Afrika thina ma-Afrika sizimisele ukwakha isizwe sama-Afrika hamba kahle mkhonto wesizwe hamba kahle mkhonto wesizwe thina ma-Afrika sizimisele ukwakha isizwe sama-Afrika thina ma-Afrika sizimisele ukwakha isizwe sama-Afrika. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Richard Cabourn. I was told off earlier calling him Dick, but that's what we knew him in the anti-apartheid movement, and I remember sitting in those executive room meetings, taking minutes, listening to all of them, and learning so much. But as he was speaking about the Freedom at 70 concert, I remembered that actually we'd received just a few minutes ago another apology from someone who really wanted to attend but is simply felt a bit unwell today, and that's Jerry Dammers, without whom the concert would not have been able to take place in the way it did. So not on the programme, but very welcome. I'm going to invite Baron Paul Boateng to come and make a few words, give a few words. Thank you.
Your Excellency, sisters and brothers, it's good to be here. It's good to have escaped the whips, Angela, to be here. In our tradition in West Africa, and I'm reminded of it looking at this audience that spans the generations, spans the races, represents so many different aspects of the struggle. There are some faces that we know all too well, because they are what I would call veterans of the struggle. In other words, they're my age, upwards of 70, been around quite some time. But they're also new, young faces, and younger faces. And by way of introduction to each other, in the tradition in which I was brought up, because like Bob, I was brought up in Africa, he was brought up in South Africa, and I was brought up in West Africa. In our tradition, when you introduce somebody to another person for the first time, when you meet somebody for the first time, they do not ask you your name or your titles or your job or any of those things. They don't even ask you who your parents were. And for us in our African tradition, you're always defined by your parents. Whatever you do, you are always your mother and father's son or daughter. No. They ask one question and one question alone. And there's certainly two people here who I know what that question is. And there may be more. And the question is this: why are you here? Why are you here? Which, if you think about it, is the best possible means of introduction. To know what brings you here, what brings you to this place. And we are here, all of us, regardless of our occupations, regardless of our race, regardless of our ages. We're here because we respect and admire and love Bob Hughes. That's why we're here, because he meant something to us in our lives, and he meant something, and indeed means something, to South Africa. So that's why we're here. We're here to celebrate and to remember the man. And when I think about him, I always think about him in the context of demonstrations and events, stuff happening. Bob was always there. And he was there when it wasn't fashionable to be there. Now everybody is an anti-racist. Everybody opposed apartheid. Everybody supported the struggle of the peoples of South Africa. Everybody was here, there, and everywhere. That is not, in fact, the case. Let's be honest about that. But Bob was always there. Opposing racism wherever he found it always meant something to Bob. Whether it was in South Africa or in Britain, he was committed to the cause of anti-racism. He was committed to the cause of freedom and justice and liberation, always. And he was there when it wasn't comfortable to be there. And for me, the picture that says it all is the picture of him with Abdul and with Mike next to the bust of Nelson Mandela. And of course, the erection of the statue in Trafalgar Square, that was something greeted with great acclamation. It's now proudly pointed at by all visitors to our Parliament. But the first bust that we had, the first public image that we had, was put up on the South Bank, was put up as a result of the anti-apartheid declaration of the GLC, was put up in the face of steadfast opposition from Margaret Thatcher and the Tories, including those on the Greater London Council, who challenged it at every point, at every point. And it was bombed and defaced repeatedly during that period in the 1980s. So we shouldn't forget what it was that Bob and the other stalwarts, including many in this room, went through in order that we could all be here, this gathering, celebrating this life to this music in South Africa House. Bob was always there. Bob was there with his wisdom. He was there with his activism. He was there with his heart, and he was there with his humor. And humor is important, isn't it? Good to have a few laughs when you're in the rain and in the cold. Bob was always there. Humor, heart, wisdom, and activism. So, it's that we remember. It's that we celebrate. That's why we're here. And so let's do a South African shout out, shall we? I'm going to say Bob Hughes 3 times, and after each time I've said it, you are going to say, and it's going to get louder every time so they can hear us outside, you're going to shout Viva. What are you going to shout? Viva! Bob Hughes! Viva! Bob Hughes! Viva! Bob Hughes! Viva! Amandla.
Thank you, Paul, as ever very rousing. We've come to the last speaker now, my friend and MP, Chion Wara. She, along with Lord Peter Hain, is our Vice President, the Vice President of Access, remained committed and involved since her anti-apartheid days. And I please invite Chi to come to the stage. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Chair. You know, it's a huge honour to be here and speak to honour Bob. It's also not a little intimidating, especially after so many wonderful tributes. And then, of course, Bob himself had so many stories to tell, and he told them so well. Bob had been in the room where it happened, during so many critical decisions, and fought so many battles in so many good causes that I know I cannot possibly do justice to him. But I can always see him telling me to have a go and get on with it. So here goes. So I started boycotting South African apples when I was 10. That was in 1975, the same year that Bob was elected vice chair of the anti-apartheid movement. Now, of course, I did not know him, but I did know that there was an anti-apartheid movement. And I just want to say how much it meant, you know, that sense of solidarity, how much that meant to me then, the only black kid in a school in Newcastle with the National Front at our gates, holding up South Africa as an example of how blacks should be treated. I joined the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s, eventually rising to the dizzying heights of the National Executive, which is where I first met Bob. Now, executive meetings were, as we heard, held in Parliament. So it was actually, the anti-apartheid movement was my first experience of that hallowed home of democracy, which is now my place of work. And we're all here because we know the anti-apartheid movement as the most successful global mass movement in solidarity with the brutal and often violent struggle of South Africa. But we also all know, indeed we've heard, that the rightness of the cause does not necessarily determine the success of the cause, and that there can be more challenging politics within a movement than outside it. And I am speaking as a Labour MP here. Chairing the anti-apartheid movement during that time was a momentous achievement. And finding the time to encourage and support a newbie like me showed Bob's kindness, but I think also that sense of fundamental equality of all of us, which ran through him. And so 2 decades later, I was standing to be selected as the Labour candidate for Newcastle Central. Bob was the only person in Parliament that I knew. I mean, he was no longer an MP, but he was a Lord. And when I got in touch with him through Layla, is Layla here? Yes, there's Layla. I got in touch with him through Layla. He immediately sent back the most brilliant endorsement of my campaigning, which really spoke to the Labour Party members of Newcastle Central and helped get me selected. And in Parliament, Bob was a friend and a guide and my go-to person for political intelligence on every country of sub-Saharan Africa and every British constituency. And as we've heard, he could always make you laugh. Now, in the 90s, Bob and I, along with many in this room, spent long hours discussing what should be the movement's legacy. After free and fair elections in South Africa, with the desire from the region to overcome the legacies of apartheid and colonialism, centuries of oppression, and the lack of resources in the region, thanks to that colonialism. ACSA was born. Bob became its first chair and later its president. And one of my priorities as Member of Parliament is champion African voices and African agency. I chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa. I was actually its first black chair, and let us be clear, that history of colonialism remains in many of our parliamentary organizations for a long time. But I'm very proud to be the Vice President for ACSA. Successful campaigns over the years have included Justice for Miners, who developed work-related diseases such as silicosis during apartheid mining, supporting women in former Swaziland, now Eswatini, in their campaigns for recognition of gender inequality and oppression, and the first period poverty campaign when called upon to support women in Zimbabwe. Following Bob's unstinting commitment and activism, ACSA will continue to work in solidarity with the Southern African region and has recently renewed and refreshed its commitment to support civil society on behalf of justice, equality, and human rights. Now, Bob and I would often find ourselves in the Pugin room in Parliament discussing some critical issue or other over a drink, or merely musing, actually, sometimes, on who it was we'd been fighting against in the UK as part of the anti-apartheid movement, given that there was nobody who had ever been against the end of apartheid. And it's very good to hear Richard and Paul name some names. But as one of those discussions, Bob told me about how he became an MP in Jenny's is speaking of that as well. And he described to me a terrifying selection process organized by his union, followed by rigorous training camp. You know, Bob was really a union man, and it was the organizing and training power of the union which enabled him to help change the world. And today we see, you know, from Silicon Valley to Dhaka, from Qatar to Kenya, from P&O ferries to Amazon, from Westminster to Xinjiang, workers' rights under threat in ways old and new. So recognizing this, and on behalf of the Hughes family, AAM Archives, and AXA, I am really, delighted, as well as honored, to be announcing today a unique bursary which will ensure the values that Bob worked for, workers' rights, equal rights, and racial justice. Bob particularly recognized the importance of young people being active in driving change. In communities still throwing off the dead hand of apartheid and colonialism, this is more important than ever. And as we see the impact of COVID-19 across the region, devastating health services and other rights. So this bursary will recognize the work of a young person or group already active in campaigning for rights, affecting workers in their communities. It's intended to encourage and support their work and amplify their voice. It could be for someone starting a workers' collective in their workplace, or learning to become a real trade union representative like Bob, or organizing to get environmental rights recognized. It might be for a campaign to respect or train workers, or on workers or gender rights. I want to start by thanking so much those who donated in remembrance of Bob, because it's thanks to that generosity that we can fund and administer the first award next year in 2023. And we imagine an annual award, but that's going to be relying on ongoing commitment for those who recognize the importance of voices from the regions being heard in multiple platforms, as Bob did. So an annual commitment to the bursary can be made this evening. I just want to draw your attention to this handily small form, which is in your memorial. You can make an annual commitment, and you can ask one of us or fill in the form yourself, and your support, your ongoing support, will enable rising young activists to keep pushing forward and to continue Bob's work in a way that I think really reflects Bob's life and Bob's sense of the value of everybody and the need for people's voices to be amplified where they are. So, and doing that for a new generation. So, I'm thanking you for your generosity and solidarity. I'd also want to commend to you the vision AXA has set out for itself, to nurture a distinctive international solidarity between the UK and Southern Africa, and to be alongside local partners as they in turn nurture change makers and seekers of justice. So we invite you to stay connected to us through AXA as we face a more unequal world. Our continuing joint action has never been so important. Thank you very much.
Well done. I was told I wasn't to do that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chi. And can I just say on behalf of the Hughes family AXA, the Anti-Apartheid Movement Archives Committee. We express our gratitude to everyone who has already made this event possible and has already donated to his memory. This will go towards the bursary. They're recognised in the booklet, in the programme, but particular thanks, I should say, to Her Excellency Tembi Tambo, the High Commission staff, including Michael, Michelle, the Deputy High Commissioner, all the volunteers that have worked so hard to make this possible, and your contributions are so appreciated. I would like to thank Tricia, who very much on her own has helped to organise this as well, and to Christabel. Without these two individuals, we would not have been here today.
And to thank you, Chintra.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. And now, before we gather for drinks, we could pay a final tribute to the region by celebrating and singing Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was about to ask for that. Thank you for allowing me not to ask you to do that. Shall we be off standing?
Nkosi Sikeleli Afrika, maluphakanyisu ondolwayo, izwa imithandazo yethu, Nkosi Sikelela thina lusapho lwayo, uze nabuluka sitshaba sa Yesu, ufediseri ntwa ematshwenyeho, sibuluke sitshaba sa Yesu, sitshaba sa South Africa. Wozamo sikelela, Nkosi sikele, wozamo yala, Nkosi sikele, wozamo ya, oyingcwele, sikelele thina lusapho lwayo, makube njalo, makube njalo, kuthi kube ngunaphakade, kuthi kube ngunaphakade.
Thank you, everyone. Please mingle and enjoy. The drinks are outside. I'll see you there. Don't forget to fill in the commitment form for the bursary.